Hello and welcome. This is the For the Fans podcast. This is episode number 13. Let's say it's a lucky 13 because we made it 13. I'm Justin Melillo. I've got Kevin McAdams alongside. Kevin, how are you tonight?
Well, we were talking about it before we went live. I spent about 3-4 hours today walking around playing that kids game Pokemon Go. My girlfriend got me back into it. She's been playing it for a couple days now.
People are still
And
playing that?
oh yeah, there's still people there. There were people in raids and gym battles and trying to get all the Pokemon that they can get. I feel like a grown man amongst kids, but there were some people older than me there too. So it was fun, and we got dinner afterward, and then now we're doing this. So I'm excited to talk about everything we watched this weekend. We had obviously the Dirt Derby at Eldora, and then we had the Xfinity race and the Cup race at Watkins Glen, which are always fan favorites. All three races are fan favorites. So I think we got a lot to talk about tonight, and I think we got a good show on in store for us.
I shouldn't be too surprised about that with the Pokemon Go because Sprint was running a promotion for a time where they were giving out gym badges to, anybody who would walk in and show their level, and you could get a badge that said level 10, 20, 30, or 40. And there were people playing in the parking lot for the longest time because the Sprint store was a gym. So you would see like the parking lot full, but nobody in the store because they'd all be outside playing. I haven't seen that much lately at work, but I shouldn't be that surprised that it's still as big as it is. But anyway, this is a NASCAR podcast, and let's get into it because there's definitely a lot to talk about this weekend. We had the Dirt Derby first up, and I don't know how many times we talked about the heartbreak and the frustrations for Stuart Friesen. So many different tracks, so many different races where he was so close to pulling it off. And yet it's almost fitting that his first win comes on the dirt at Eldora. Kind of, it works because all those frustrations just lead to this moment of glory for him where I wouldn't say that he was the best truck on when was it, Thursday night?
Thursday night, yeah.
Yeah, it used to be on Wednesday night, but they moved it this year. So
I think that was a good decision too, personally.
I
Close to the weekend. That's just me.
I guess because they kind of definitely needed the extra day of travel. Pocono was on Saturday, and they got done with that, and they had to go to their race shops, switch out the trucks, and then go all the way to Ohio to go to Eldora. So, I guess so. I tuned in on, or I looked on the internet on Wednesday night expecting to see when it was going to be, and then it's like on Thursday. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So, Thursday night, Eldora, Friesen arguably has the second or third best truck all night. It was Chase Briscoe, though. He was absolutely dominant in the very, right from the get-go. He was the fastest truck in practice. He won his heat. He started on the pole, won the first two stages. Briscoe's the defending winner of the race from last year. And it was a pretty big caution fest, not going to lie. They had, in the first stage, they had 3 cautions, 2 for spins, then 1 for the end of the stage. Stage 2, they had another 4 cautions. Pretty big. There was a big one in stage 2. I remember that one, and then there were a couple more in the final stage as well. But it's weird the way that they do it. It's not like a normal NASCAR National Series event because it's pit road is so different. What they do is they only allow them to change tires or refuel during the stage breaks. That's right. The only time. Unless you have extenuating circumstances where you have damage or you blow a tire or whatever happens, and then there's a penalty to of course go with that. But the pits, they open them up it's kind of like a red flag situation.
It's like a local short track event because they at New Smyrna Speedway, when they have cautions, they don't count the caution laps for most of the short races, but they'll count them for like the longer ones. But you can always come in for setup adjustments or anything, and you don't lose any time. If you're in there for 3 laps, you're in there for 3 laps. You don't lose any time. But yeah, essentially, they only could change stuff during the breaks, which I liked. I think it allowed for strategy, and then if you needed to like adjust your car or fix some damage, you can just come in, start at the back, and you're good to go.
Right. So they bring them down because the pit road isn't that big. So it's not going to be able to hold a full 32 truck field. So they bring them down the pits. They line half of them up on the left side. They line half of them up on the right side. They allow the crews to go walk over. They give them a certain amount of time. They can only fuel the car or they can only change the tires. They can't do both at the same time. Just a safety precaution since it's, a live pit road and there are going to be trucks that are going to be moving in and out, and they're like in the middle and all that. So they do that, and they allow the opportunity to do that during the end of stage 1 and the end of stage 2. So during stage 1, Briscoe stays out, Friesen stays out, a bunch of others stay out. Not many people take it in stage 1, but stage 2, you see a lot more coming in, because you don't know if anybody's going to be able to make it. If they go green the entire rest of the way, chances are nobody's going to be able to make it without having to have stopped at least in stage 1. So Friesen, they have the very ballsy move to stay out and never pit during this entire race. And it worked out because they had enough cautions, then they had enough opportunity to save enough gas. Briscoe, on the other hand, they decided to pit. And I believe he started somewhere about, I want to say like 10th or 9th or something on the stage 3 restart. And almost immediately he got involved in an incident that tore up the truck pretty bad. He got pretty knocked around, but still he was really fast. And coming up through the field, it was interesting to see because he had the fresh tires. Even though they're on dirt, tires still do make a little bit of a difference. Yeah. Briscoe's coming up. He's up into about 3rd, and they have another caution. And this is coming down to the end of it. So they re-rack, and I think Briscoe restarted in 3rd at this point. So he's not in the preferred line. So they get the restart, and they go up, and Friesen still, he's there and he's pulling away, and we're still not sure if he's going to be able to make it on gas. And Briscoe goes, and he's about the only one out there that could have a shot at getting Friesen. But with about 8 laps to go, the caution flew for the final time, and it was Chase Briscoe spinning around, including his teammate Ben Rhodes, and collecting the 33 truck as well. Who was driven by Mike Marlar, but Marlar was able to continue forward and actually got a really nice finish. He got 4th place finish,
which is awesome for that Rayom truck. Like I think that's easily their best finish ever for their team. So that's cool to see.
And isn't that awesome that equipment really? I mean, it made a difference, but it brought the field closer together. You saw more talent out there, and who were, towards the front more than you saw the equipment out there. Just looking through this list, Marlar's definitely the one that stands out in that 33 truck. But, I mean, you got Tyler Dipple up there in 8th. You got Justin Shipley in the 80 truck in 11th. You got Austin Wayne Self in 13th. Mark Smith, he was up there for a good portion of the race. He was in 15th. The high side tickler, he was up there. Kyle Strickler.
Awesome.
He unfortunately got involved in an incident, but I mean he was up there and he was in the DGR Crosley truck. I think I misspoke last week and said he was going to be in KBM equipment because I saw 54.
It's a TRD truck, so I mean.
Yeah, it's close, but it's still not the equipment. The 74 was driven by Darwin Peters Jr. The 08 was driven by Tim Ward. They got 16th and 17th, not in that order. Jennifer Jo Cobb got a 19th. So like you look at this and there's like so many names that you don't see because they're not part of the truck series on a normal basis, but they all come out for this Eldora Dirt Derby, and it's really cool to see them mix it up with the regulars. Definitely a point that I enjoy with this, but yeah, the night was all about Friesen though. He finally got that monkey off his back.
He finally, yeah. I was actually pretty surprised to see him stay out, but I think he made the right call just because obviously he won, but the way the track was, I have to give a little bit of slap to Tony Stewart because he normally prepares this track really well for the dirt racing, for the trucks because you have to prepare it a little bit differently. The High Line was 100% the way to go, and the way Eldora is constructed, about the last 20, 15 or so feet is banked about like 20, 24 degrees, and then the rest of the track is about 10 to 12 degrees or so, and then the very bottom is as flat as a pancake. So but for like sprint car racing, this is one of the best tracks that they go to just because there's so many options to choose from. With the trucks, you pretty much had to run the high line. And it looked like at the very end of the race, the bottom line started to come in, but it was too little too late. Uh, I really think if the track was a lot more evenly, as far as like the high line's really good, because the year that Crafton won, the low line was actually really really good, and he used it for a lot of the race, and he won that race. If Chase had the opportunity to run the bottom and it be just as fast as the high line, I think not only would Chase have won, I think it would have been a lot more boring because he was so fast in general. He would have just pulled away. But going back to what you were saying about like these guys that just out of nowhere, I remember watching the beginning of the race and Jake Griffin in the '03, this pink just mangled up truck from Mike Alferano Racing. He uh he was in the top 10 for a good point of the first stage. I think he got involved in a wreck or caused a wreck himself, but it was cool to see like just random guys that you don't see run up front. And then Carson Hocevar, a 16-year-old running for Jordan Anderson, doing the same thing. Ran in the top 10 for a little bit of the first half of the race, and obviously there's wrecks, and this is one of these races are just at the end of the day just it can be a real crash fest because a lot of these guys, Ross Chastain even admitted it, they're not dirt guys. They've never really been dirt guys. Then you have the complete opposite in someone like Stuart Friesen showing up. That's all he's done is dirt. So it's definitely a good parody as far as the field is concerned. I always love Eldora. It's different, and I like the fact that they only do this with the trucks. I think it would become too saturated if they decided, oh, let's go to Springfield or something with Xfinity, and or go to Williams Grove with Cup, or go to Volusia with Cup. I think it would just become too much of a, like, there is such thing as too much of a good thing, and it would start to become a little bit watered down. And the racing is so insane because they don't have the opportunity to set up their trucks right, and they have these one hit guys, like when Bobby Pierce ran in the Mittler brothers truck a few years ago, he almost won for them. And it's like that's the cool part of showing up to this week. I mean, we had Tyler Dipple. Tyler Dipple was in the top 5 at one point, and I thought someone, I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but people were talking about like, man, the playoffs would be real shaken up if Tyler Dipple won this race. And he got up there. He was in the top 5. So I mean, you get one good restart, you get one bobble from Friesen, you get a little bit of an incident between the front 3 or 4, and he would have probably been up there to win it. So I mean, the race was awesome, but like I said before, the one issue that the track just was uh, not set up right for the trucks. The High Line was way too good. It was way too overpowered. It lent for no passing. Normally, a track with the High Line like that will not allow for passing because you can't go around them. You have to basically go under them, and if you can't, then you're stuck. But I mean, they definitely can make passes. It was just a lot harder than it probably should have been. But at the end of the day, the race was actually really good, and I'm happy for Stewart. It's just ironic that he wins his first race on dirt, not only because he's a dirt guy, but he wins at Tony Stewart's racetrack. And if you follow the truck series close enough, or if you follow NASCAR close enough, you know that Stuart Friesen and Tony Stewart have a bit of a personal rivalry. It goes as far as them sharing women. So it's pretty crazy and pretty ironic to see Stuart Friesen win at Tony Stewart's track for his first NASCAR win in the Truck Series here on last Thursday.
That definitely had to be awkward for Tony Stewart there.
Here's your golden shovel. Thanks for taking my ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, so definitely I wasn't even there, and like I could just imagine the tension like building between, them having to face each other in victory lane. So definitely had to be awkward. But with the lines in the track, I wonder if that had anything to do with the amount of cautions that we had. You got to think this race had run almost 50% of it under caution. It was 45.3% of the race was run under caution, with the average green flag lap being about 6.3 laps. Looking at last year's event, they only ran about a quarter of the race under caution, 26.8%, and their average green flag run was about 11.2. And I know just from listening to the pre-race and listening to a lot of these dirt experts talk about how the dirt and the rubber, mix, and how the lines get, formed and they come and they go. Usually when the line gets run and everybody's on a run, it gets worn out, and that line becomes the less preferred groove. And then you have to start searching and going down and lower and trying to find the grip in the dirt that hasn't been used yet. But I just feel like that wasn't able to come to fruition because of the amount of laps that they were running under caution. It was a crazy amount. Like it was like they go and then caution, and then they run a bunch of laps under caution trying to figure out who would get in what position, because everybody had to argue. No, I think I'm supposed to be ahead of that guy. No, I'm supposed to be. So they end up like 4 wide coming to the restart, and they have to call it off because they're, and I think even at one point Ben Rhodes got black flag, but they rescinded it because he actually ended up getting in his position. But he, that's how crazy it was with people trying to get as many spots as they could, just trying to get to the restart itself. So I really wonder if that had anything to do with it, because this race only had one lead change the entire night. It was when
it was in the pits.
It was in the pits when Briscoe went in and Stewart Friesen stayed out. Usually I'm so used to seeing the Dirt Derby with them racing like 3 wide for the lead, with somebody all the way on the bottom, like hugging that inside wall, somebody all the way up on the top, kissing it with their right rear, and somebody in the middle just trying to make something work. And we didn't get any of that this year. And I'm not saying that it was a bad race at all, because I really did enjoy the hell out of it. It was a different feel to it, and I feel like the cautions played a bigger role.
Well, I'm just looking at the past. This was definitely the slowest on average race, 41.24 miles per hour.
Sad.
But I mean, every race since 2015 has been in the 40s. So I mean, in 2015 we had 9 lead changes, 13 cautions, 3 lead changes in 2016 with Larson winning. But I think I would give that more credit to Larson just being so fast and controlling that high line. The Crafton race in 2017 that I was talking about earlier had 10 cautions, and it had 7 lead changes. And then last year had 7 lead changes as well, with 9 cautions. So I don't think the cautions are going to be a good enough excuse, at least for me.
Well, I'm not looking at the number of cautions. I'm looking at the number of laps under cautions.
Right, but I mean, it's only 6 or 7 laps more than 2015, and that was the most lead changes we've ever had in this event.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think it's a combination of. I would definitely say that's a factor because, like I mentioned, the inside line did start to come in at the very end. If they ran maybe another 20, 30 laps under green, it probably would have been a lot better. But it's just, I think it's just the way that Eldora is constructed. The high line definitely is the way to go, just because of the way that the banking is. Most dirt tracks are pretty universal, except for maybe the very very bottom. Eldora is kind of unique in that sense. Like the very very high line has a lot of banking, and it makes it really the preferred groove a lot quicker than normal. So I'm not saying Eldora is a bad track. It's an amazing track, but it's just I wish they would go somewhere else with this. Try it somewhere else. I mentioned it before. I think Williams Grove is a great track, and I would love to see him go there. Why not try it at Knoxville? That's literally like the Daytona 500 of the World of Outlaws. Why not go to Knoxville for a year and see how it races there? Because I mean, I love Eldora, but it seems like this is a common issue every single year. It lends for insane passing and crazy racing and crazy wrecks, but I do want to see something more of like a conventional dirt race where the inside line's the way to go, and then as the race goes on, the high line does come in, and then there's a cushion. But with here, it's like the entire top 20 feet of the track is a cushion. So, but I mean, I can't really complain too much. It's always a fun race to watch, and you really can't take much away from it. The one lead change, I mean, I can't even be mad about that because you could argue that Chase Briscoe had the best truck the whole entire night, and then Stuart Friesen had the second best truck the entire night. So, and Briscoe obviously had his incidents. So, I can't really get upset about that. The racing was still really fun to watch, and it was insane the whole entire night with people throwing it in there and all the wrecks and people like Ross Chastain, who we consider to be a top 5 talent in the series, getting loose and spinning in front of the entire field. And it's a wild race, and it has wild expectations, and it always makes them. So I think it was a fun night overall.
We'll talk about it in a little bit, but Ross definitely had a wild weekend altogether. The last thing I wanted to bring up regarding the trucks was the points situation. This was the second to last race before the regular season ends. Their last race is going to be this weekend at Michigan. The way that it stands right now, we have with wins Stuart Friesen third in points. Brett Moffitt has 2 wins, fourth in points. Then we have Austin Hill has a win, ninth in points. Johnny Sauter has a win, 10th in points. Then we have Tyler Ankrum has a win, 12th in points. And Ross Chastain has his wins in 14th in points. So that's 6 of the 8 spots that are taken up by winners, which means that one person's going to get in at least that's going to make it in on points. And we could have possibly 7 people making it in as winners going into the playoffs. Those people who could win and lock themselves in include Grant Enfinger, who's currently first in points, Matt Crafton, who's currently second in points, Ben Rhodes, fifth in points, Harrison Burton, sixth in points, Todd Gilliland, seventh in points, Sheldon Creed, eighth in points, and Tyler Dipple, 11th in points. So let's just say Tyler Dipple goes in and he has the weekend of his life and he goes in and wins that race. Grant Enfinger has enough of a points cushion over Matt Crafton where he could really finish like last and still be locked in as the regular season champion even without a win. So we're talking about Matt Crafton could finish second in that race, finish second in the regular season point standings, and could be missing the playoffs just because of the way that this season has run its course.
Wild. That is so wild to think about because I was like, oh, it's going to be pretty crazy because, I mean, there's 5, 6 guys that need to win, but I had no idea. Or if I did have any idea, I completely forgot that Matt Crafton was that far up in points. I know Ben Rhodes has been up there, and of course, Stuart Friesen, when he didn't have his win, was second or third and whatnot. I mean, the first 4 guys are all within 60 points of each other, so it's been back and forth between second through fourth, but wow. I mean, it's definitely possible. I honestly don't see someone like Matt Crafton winning. I wouldn't. It's weird. I think Sheldon Creed can make up the ground from a talent standpoint. He hasn't been that impressive this year, but he's definitely shown he has that fringe talent that like a road ringer or a specialty guy, like a dirt guy. I mean, he was fast at Eldora, and he's been fast on road courses before in the past, like in other series. So it's I would like to see him win just because I mean the dude has not caught a break all year. He's eighth in points. He has one top five, five top tens, three DNFs this year. But we've talked about it all year. The KBM trucks, neither of them are in right now. Imagine Harrison Burton or Todd Gilliland locking themselves in with a road, or not with a road win, with a win at Michigan. So I mean, it's going to be a crazy race, especially with the tire compound that they added. It's definitely going to be probably more of a wide open kind of affair. So anything can happen. Anything can happen going into the playoffs.
I really am looking forward to this weekend because it's gonna be almost at the level of Daytona or Talladega, how close these trucks are gonna be racing against each other and how close they're gonna be racing one another. Maybe not as close as Talladega or Daytona, but still, it's going to be pack racing in a sense. We saw Bubba Wallace win here a couple years ago, and he made a crazy move and was able to hold off the field. But I mean, that could be any one of these guys. They're all fighting for their playoff lives here. We're talking about. I'm pretty sure Grant Enfinger just needs to start, and then he's gonna win. And
What's the minimum points that you can receive in this? Is it
it's 5 points.
Okay, so I mean, unless these guys all finish like first, second, and third in each stage, I say you're right. He probably needs for security's sake, finish 25th.
No, I'm looking at it right here. Figure it the way that it maths out. He needs to have a 50-point lead going in. So Grant Enfinger is going to be in the playoffs. He has a 52-point lead over Crafton. So no matter what Crafton does, and
What's
even
the max points you can get then?
you can get 60? You can get 60, but that includes winning the race, and winning the race trumps points. So it's
yeah.
you know, like that's not going to matter at that point. If Crafton wins, that's great, but Enfinger's not going to get passed by anybody else anyway. Like Crafton, you know, he could go out there, he could win the race and make sure and max points, and he could win the regular season championship. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Enfinger's a lock for that. What I'm saying is Enfinger's a lock for the playoffs. But what I am saying is Crafton could miss it, and if Crafton does make it, we're talking about a world where Ben Rhodes, Harrison Burton, Todd Gilliland, Sheldon Creed, those four drivers all driving for, you know, top of the line equipment, all not making it into the 2019 playoffs. And that was really the point I was trying to make. Maybe I was a little bit roundabout in how I was, but like that's just it blows my mind that this is where we are with one race left in the regular season. And it kind of almost reminds me of the earlier days of the chase where they were only taking like 10 people in and you had guys like Stewart and Gordon missing. So like,
don't remind me of '05. Oh my God, that was a horrible year.
I apologize, but it's just that was exciting to me, and this is exciting to me too. And I'm looking forward to see how all of these drivers and all these teams attack this weekend, because I think I'm setting my sights up a little bit too high here, but I think we're in for a pretty awesome show in the truck series.
I mean, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you throw in Dipple, you got 6 guys vying for one spot. So I mean, it's going to be pretty insane. So I mean, if one of these guys ends up not winning, it's going to be a pretty crazy battle. I mean, obviously, Crafton gets in if one of the other guys wins, but it's going to be. And the crazy thing is, with this tire compound being added, most of the time you have to throw the car onto the lower banking on the inside groove to make a pass, and a lot of the times, if it doesn't stick, you're going to the back. if that high line gets going, it's going to become a viable option as a passing lane. And you could see a 2, 3, 4 wide finish for the win if it gets pretty crazy. I think Michigan this week is going to be a lot better for having that. And I think it's going to really improve the trucks because most of the time, for about 10, 15 laps, they're wide open and they really can't go anywhere. Now, if that high line becomes a viable lane, they have somewhere to take that run and go high instead of low. So I'm excited to see how it works just because it's going to be essentially a preview for the cup race. So I'm excited, and it's going to be a good weekend for sure if the truck race is good.
I agree, and I'm looking forward to it. So that was trucks. They ran the dirt derby at Eldora. Then a couple days later, everybody packed up and headed up north to my home state, New York. We are in Watkins Glen. And I went to Watkins Glen for the first time in my life. It was really cool. The Zippo 200 at the Glen for the Xfinity Series, and that race was very, very interesting with how it all played out. You had we had some drama, we had some implications, and we had a first-time winner in Austin Cindric. All in all, I felt like this race had like the complete package of everything I would look for in a race. And not to say that Sunday didn't have that either, but this race definitely stood out to me as the race of the weekend. It was definitely a really good show.
I agree with you. I mean, I'd get rid of the asterisk of H. Allmendinger being DQ'd, but I 100% agree with you. I enjoyed the last. I didn't watch the first two stages live. I was at a birthday party, and I managed to watch the final 30 laps or so, and it was insane. I loved every minute of it. The back and forth, the strategy, Cindric pitting for tires and going from ninth to first in basically 5 laps because of the way caution's set up and whatnot, and then finally him or going from ninth to second, then catching Allmendinger with about 2 to go, and them going back and forth, and Allmendinger gets past, but then he's right on Cindric's ass and pushes him into turn 10, pushes him wide, and then Allmendinger makes, which is just completely out of his character, and makes a big mistake out of turn 11 or turn 7, whatever you want to call it, the final corner, and gives Cindric the lead back, and then he tries to do it again going into one, doesn't quite get there, and then Cindric obviously pulls away because of the tires. But I mean, let's not forget that Austin Cindric can wheel a road car. He's a road course guy through and through, and that's why he was even up there in the first place. I mean, he's definitely got the skills to put a high performing car in victory lane, and he did just that. It was besides that, it was still a fantastic race. You had tempers flaring, you had back and forth with the who's in the lead. You had Kyle Busch dominating the first stage, but then he had his fair share of issues with his right front suspension completely quitting on him through the bus stop. So I mean, it was a wild show for sure.
You missed the at your birthday party. You missed the first two stages. So in the very first stage was probably the wildest part, at least to me. Yeah, it was so. I'm so conflicted because I really like both of these drivers, and I try not to show my biases, but I mean it's clear who I root for on any given week. But with about 5 laps to go in the stage, we had an accident in the bus stop, and it was a battle for probably around like 10th place. Ross Chastain, he gets into the bus stop a little bit too hard, and Allgaier, he was really aggressive to try and get that position, but Allgaier hadn't cleared Chastain yet. So Chastain was definitely trying to not give up the position, hit the curbing wrong, pushed up into the 7 car of Allgaier, and 1, 2, 3. The third hit finally sends Allgaier spinning around, and Allgaier hits the tires on the wall, the outside wall of the bus stop, hits it pretty decently. I mean, it caused quite a lot of damage to the car. Not enough to retire him from the event, but I definitely thought that his race was over at that point. They fixed up the damage. They get going. They get the restart. And coming down to the end of the first stage, Allgaier had already caught up to Chastain, and they're on the final lap of stage one. Kyle Busch he's gone at this point because Kyle Busch was the man to beat all weekend. He had already gone on and probably won the stage at this point. But Allgaier gets into the inner loop, the bus stop, and he's right on Chastain's like rear end. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, he's probably just gonna nudge him out of the way and just probably show his displeasure, maybe throw a finger out the window, you know, that'll probably be it. But no, they come out of the bus stop and Allgaier's still right there, like he is glued to the back of Ross Chastain's bumper. And they go into the outer loop, the carousel, and Allgaier he doesn't use his brakes at all. He just uses Ross's bumper as a brake and pushes Ross into the flat part of the carousel. Like the carousel is banked, and then at the very top it like flattens off and like actually angles towards the walls and the tires. So Chastain gets put up there above that line, above that banking, and just goes straight into the tires, completely destroys his car. I didn't see that coming at all. I didn't think Justin Allgaier had a retaliation bone like that in his body. It was absolutely insane to watch. And my opinion is that I really think that retaliation is something that happens in NASCAR. I'm not going to sit here and deny that. As Kevin Harvick once said, this sport was built on fights, and it makes things a lot more exciting. You had a lot of people on social media calling for Allgaier's head. They wanted him parked. They wanted him suspended. Ross has gotten a pretty big following in the last couple of weeks and months because of everything that he's gone through and all the hearts that he's won over with his switch to the trucks and his wins in the trucks in the Xfinity series. So Ross has definitely got a big crowd of followers following him, and they all wanted blood. They wanted Allgaier's head on a platter because of what he did. And meanwhile, I'm sitting over here like, oh, come on. Why did it have to be those two? But at the same time, it was exciting in a sense that you saw those tempers flare. You saw Allgaier get out of his element, and thankfully Ross was okay. He took a hard lick into those tires. I was glad to see him get out, and he goes over to the media or the medical center, and his interview afterwards, he's like, I'll handle it. I'll take care of whatever I need to take care of. And Allgaier after the race, he's like, I think I handled it. I think I've took care of it. I think I've sent my message. So I don't think either of them are on the same page still, and I think that it's going to continue going forward. And I really hope it doesn't cost either of them anything else. It's difficult. It's difficult to be in the position that they're both in. But it definitely set the tone for the weekend at Watkins Glen.
Yeah, definitely can't disagree with you there. Chastain, and we've talked about it, and I think it's just known if you're a big NASCAR fan. Chastain is kind of like how we envision how Ryan Newman drives other cars on the track. If he's 2 laps down, guess what? He's still going to race your ass off. If you're on the same lap as him, you better believe he's going to race you 10 times harder. He's just an aggressive guy. He's cutthroat because he's scratched and clawed his way to be where he is. I mean, yeah, he had a Brad Keselowski truck ride, but I mean that was his best ride up until this Nice truck. So I mean he's scratched and clawed in the JD cars. He made the chase, or not the chase, like the playoffs last year in that car. So I mean it's just he's had to scratch and claw, and he's had to be aggressive, and he's had to command respect. And I mean he even it just is the one thing I do have that's a little bit of a, I wouldn't say an issue, but it was not equivalent. It was definitely not tit for tat between Ross and Justin. The wreck on Allgaier, it definitely hurt his car, but they got it fixed, and he ended up having a pretty good race. I mean, he absolutely just destroyed Ross's day. I mean, that car was destroyed. And that's the only thing I really have against it. I kind of wish it was more of like okay, you got me around here on a mistake. It was not intentional. It was a mistake, an honest mistake at a really tight part of the racetrack. He could have easily just turned him into turn one or even turn 10 where there's a lot of runoff. Just get him out of the way. Hey, you got mine, I got yours, kind of deal. But I mean, he just ruined his night, and that's the only thing I really have against it, especially a team like Johnny Davis, where they don't have unlimited resources. They don't have millions of dollars coming in from sponsorship like JRM does and the Seven does. So that's my only issue I have with it, is that he destroyed a perfectly capable car. That honestly I didn't think was necessary. That's my only gripe against it. I did like I said, I watched it before today. I watched it Sunday night actually after our race. So it was I just thought it was a little bit too over the top, but I mean, he definitely got definitely gave him what he thought he deserved, and I guess I can't fault Justin for having some balls there and getting done what he thought needed to be done.
It definitely wasn't the best place to do it. One of my friends in the media center pretty much summed it up as best as he could for me, and I agree with it. It was like that situation quite a number of years ago, right about when Brad Keselowski had come into the Cup Series and was driving the number 12 for Roger Penske.
Are you talking about the Atlanta accident?
I am talking about the Atlanta accident and how Carl Edwards had gotten taken out earlier in the event, and then he came back onto the track, and you could see the white gloves turn into Keselowski. He was definitely taking measures into his own hands there, and you just wouldn't, you would expect there to be payback for it, sure, but you wouldn't expect it to be right there, right then, at probably the fastest part of the track. And the car of Keselowski gets airborne and flies very scarily into the pit or the outside retaining wall. And if it would have landed at a different angle, we might be talking about how Brad Keselowski had such a promising career coming up, cut short. But thankfully that didn't happen. But I mean, I would say that this was maybe the road course equivalent of that, between Allgaier and Chastain. It just wasn't the smartest place. It definitely made a point and got a point across, I think. But it just, I don't think that it was the best place to do that. It was definitely a very dangerous place to serve up his payback. But that's one part of the race that was definitely exciting in the beginning stages. You kind of mentioned it before that Kyle Busch had broke his suspension coming to the end of stage 2. Like I said before, Kyle Busch was pretty much the guy to beat, and I remember listening to it on the radio on my way up. Claire B. Lang was asking all the drivers, all the people that she could, do you think Kyle Busch is going to be beatable on Saturday? And a lot of people said no. A lot of people said that no, there's no way that Kyle Busch is going to go down at a place like Watkins Glen in equipment like he was in. But equipment fails, and Kyle Busch was pushing as hard as he could to get back up to the lead. He was battling Blaney there with about 5 laps to go in the stage, and Blaney was, of course, on older tires. Kyle Busch was on newer tires. Busch goes into the bus stop and just lands funny, and the way that he landed ended up breaking the left front suspension, and that was, or was it the right front? Either way, he broke the suspension, and he goes off just before the carousel and parks his car, and the caution comes out, and he pulls it into the pits. They look at it, and the tires limp, and that was it. They pulled it behind the garage, and Kyle Busch was done for the day, and that really opened it up to the rest of the field.
I mean, yeah, it sucks that happened to Kyle, because at the end of the day, I think all of us want a good race, but we also want to see the best of the best win. And I would have liked to see the likes of Cindric, Busch, Allmendinger. Christopher Bell says he's not much of a road racer, but he ends up finishing top 3 in the first stage, whether it's strategy or not. Jeremy Clements was also up there, which is always fun to see. He's always a threat. And we're going to another road course next week, so he might play spoiler there too. Uh, and then eh, I don't know what happened to him. He finished like ninth or something. Bell did, but you hate to see.
Bell?
Uh,
Didn't he finish second?
oh, he finished second in the. He finished ninth in the second stage. That's what
Ah.
I meant. No, not in the whole race. Yeah, he
Oh, I
did finish
got you.
second in the race. Because of Allmendinger failing. But the racing, like I said, what little I saw on the third stage was impressive. It's just looking at the running order. It's funny how this all lines up because if you look through the race, I mean, obviously we've mentioned a few times, Allmendinger failed inspection for the second time in that 10 car. They're 2 for 2, and they need to figure out something. I don't know if they're testing stuff or doing R&D work for RCR or what, but they need to stop failing tech for AJ because it's starting to get a little bit ridiculous.
I,
Yeah,
it,
looking at
Let me just interject for a second because I did talk to somebody about that, and I'm not going to name anybody because I like to keep my sources close to the subject so that I can bring information like this to you. But I mean, it definitely wasn't denied to me about anything to do with the engine issue that they had with Daytona, whether that was fair or foul play. But this incident that happened at Watkins Glen was more or less very similar to what happened at Iowa with the Ross Chastain truck and at Chicagoland with the Christopher Bell car. It was a part failure. They allowed the heights of the cars to come down during the race as long as at the end of the race they go back up a certain amount. And this car did not do that, just like Ross's truck didn't do that, just like Christopher Bell's car didn't do that. So it was a very similar situation where it was a part failure that caused Allmendinger's issues this week. So I don't think it was anything malicious this week. It was just terrible, terrible luck on Allmendinger's part to now be 2 for 2 in disqualifications. Something I don't think anybody would have expected coming out of Watkins Glen. Um, it was just I just wanted you know I just want to interject that because
oh, that's fine.
Allmendinger, whatever happened to Daytona, I've heard rumors and crazy things about that I really am not at liberty to share. Whether it was fair or foul or whatever, the penalty still is upheld, and he came home with a last place finish at Daytona, which kind of spoiled the 1-2-3 finish that they originally had. And unfortunately, this weekend he is gonna end up with a last place finish again, which makes Allmendinger the probably the worst in getting points in the Xfinity Series this season, which is a biz.
I think he has 2 points.
It's a big sad.
He has 2 points total this year in the Xfinity Series, so I'd say you're right on that. But what I was going to mention is that if you look at the running order, the way they finish is pretty crazy. You got obviously Cindric, Bell, Allgaier, and Blaney, and Reddick on the top five. Reddick was not by any stretch of the imagination a threat to win this race, but coming out fifth is always a positive thing, especially when you're battling for a regular season championship. So kudos to him for maximizing his points.
Did you see his day? Like, he missed the bus
crazy.
stop like 4 times.
I know, it was crazy. Like I said, he didn't have the best day. And he comes out fifth, so I'll say that's a win in his eyes for sure. But then you got Chase Briscoe and Cole Custer on the same team. Then you got Annette, Gregson, and Preece, which Preece actually was looking pretty good for not really running road courses much in his career. So, and I'm pretty sure that's why he ran this race, because he does not have a lot of experience.
Right.
I think that's also why I ran K&N at Sonoma a few weeks ago. So, I mean, coming in 10th by no means is a bad finish for a guy who does not run this. Jeremy Clements comes in 11th. Like I said, he started and finished in 11th, which is pretty consistent. I legitimately think if they can get a serviceable car for Mid-Ohio, he could be a spoiler for not only making the playoffs, but for that race to win.
He spun twice.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's like he's still fast. I mean, like I said, he finished third in top 10 in the first stage, and he won at Road America, and that was not only because of fuel, but he was fast. He was legitimately fast. So it's we'll see if that translates to anything. Scott Heckert finishes 13th in the five for BJ McLeod. So we were talking about how there was crazy parity for the truck race because of dirt. You had kind of the same thing for here in Xfinity, just because of how crazy these races get at the end, and we saw what happened to Bell, basically turning himself in front of the entire field. That should have been a 10-car wreck, by the way. That was
What a save.
almost a disaster for the entire field. Kind of ruined the finish a little bit up until Cindric catching Allmendinger, but what a wild race, and I mean, the race had everything. Last lap passes, battles for the win. You got controversy, and you got fights, and you got uh, people who shouldn't really be up there being up there. It was a fun race overall, and I think, like you said before, this was 100% the race of the weekend for me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the Cup race, but I really enjoyed the Xfinity race, and mainly because of the last lap battles that was going on between Cindric and Allmendinger. I was standing there on pit road with a couple laps to go. Allmendinger had the lead, coming down to two to go. They start like bashing each other like into the corners. Like Cindric just puts a bumper and pushes Allmendinger into the corner, gets him wide. Allmendinger gets right back on him and pushes him into the next corner, and he takes the lead back. I think you already explained this, where they were just going back and forth and back and forth, and that we didn't see that on Sunday, which we'll get to that and why that happened. But these cars, these Xfinity cars, they allowed that to happen, which probably made it the better race of the weekend because of that. There was a battle for the lead all the whole last stage for the Cup race, but it wasn't a battle like this. And despite Allmendinger getting his penalty and having to forfeit the second position and finish 37th instead, it still made for an incredible finish to the race, an incredible all around day. Um, it was definitely a for my first race that I've ever attended at Watkins Glen. It was definitely one I'm gonna remember, and yeah, I'm kind of speechless after that. So I'm gonna ask you, because you ask me every week. Looking at the big three, Tyler Reddick, Christopher Bell, Cole Custer, they all pretty much finished around the same area. Cole Custer being the worst of them in seventh, Reddick in fifth, Bell in second. Who's got the advantage right now to be the champion?
It it's it's so tough because I don't think it's necessarily Reddick's equipment failing him in the sense that his finishes are not bad. Like I just said, he finished fifth, but Christopher Bell and Custer have definitely had the better cars, and it's going to be so tough for me to go against Reddick, just because he definitely can make up the difference. He has a fifth place car at Homestead. He's definitely shown if he can get that high line going, it's worth 2 or 3 tenths of a second on the track, and that's all you really need to make up ground. I mean, right now, if I had to like say, based on the way they're running, if they're gonna run like this for the rest of the year, hello, I'd say Bell, just because he's been. It's like a bunch of waves. First it was Reddick, and then it was Custer. Now it's Bell. Bell finished second, and basically what he described himself as at a place where he's not really good at. He's not really a road racer, and we'll see more of the same next week. We're going to Mid Ohio. Mid Ohio, it's one of the weirdest. It's like basically how we've been talking about the 2019 season for Cup. Uh, Mid Ohio is typically a bland racetrack just because how technical it is. It's hard to pass on the second half of the circuit. You obviously have turn one, and then you have turn two, and then turn five there, and those are always crazy passing zones. But then you have a really technical part of the track. With the Xfinity guys, we see bump and runs. We see guys diving it in places that you really aren't supposed to, because most of the time if you try and do something like that, you're destroying your car, because it's either an open wheel car or a road racing car like a GT3 car or a prototype. So I Mid Ohio is one of those races where it's just like Pandora's box is open. Anything can happen. We've seen crazy finishes. We've seen crazy incidents, whether it be into turn 2 or turn 5, where they have to take that right and left hander. So I mean, it's going to be crazy. But to answer your question, I'd say right now, if Bell can keep up this momentum, just like when we were talking about Custer, if Custer could have kept the momentum, we would have probably called him the favorite. But right now, Bell's been the fastest guy week in and week out, and it's gonna be close. But it's definitely right now Bell has the edge for sure.
Based on the events that happened at Watkins Glen, I'm going to agree with you with Bell because Custer wrecked his primary car in practice. He had to start in the back. And yeah, he was able to get back up to a 7th place finish, but still was pretty much a non factor for the entire event. Then you look at Reddick, and Reddick, every time that he would get back into it, he'd take himself right back out. He, like I said, missed the bus stop. I want to say definitely twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, where when you miss the bus stop, the penalty becomes you have to do a stop and go in the bus stop. You missed it, so you have to come to a complete stop and then you can go. And you lose a lot of time in doing that. And that definitely happened to him twice, maybe if not 4 times. It was very. It was tough to see. It was very tough to see for Reddick because he's the defending champion and you wouldn't expect that out of him. But he's just such an aggressive driver where he's just going for it every lap, and he was trying to get as much as he could, of course, into the bus stop and just blew it a couple times. So, but Bell, not a road racer, and still pulls out a 2nd place finish. Got to give the advantage to him right now. He's the most recent race winner of the group, I believe. So it's definitely going to be a fun one to watch, and we'll continue to talk about it as we get closer to it. Again, no change in the top 12. It was funny. I was talking to the PR rep for Greg Alding, and he said that Gray's out finished Brandon Jones the last couple weeks, yet has not gained a point on him because Jones is getting those playoff points. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to expect Greg Alding in 13th to catch up to Brandon Jones in 12th or Ryan Sieg in 11th in the next 6 races before the regular season ends. But that was funny to hear that is even happening right now. But yeah, let's move on to the main event because we're getting into crunch time here. The main event of the weekend was the Go Bowling at the Glen. No number. I don't know why. It kind of bothered me a lot. Usually it's 355.
The length of this race bothers me a lot, but I can talk about that here in a second.
I mean, it should have a number attached to it. That's just my opinion. Whether it's 355 or 169 or 420 blaze it, I don't care. Just put a number to it. Just don't call it the Go Bowling at the Glen. That bothers the hell out of me. Just like the Eldora Dirt Derby, like call it the Eldora Dirt Derby 150 or something.
Or
like
the Irwin Tools Night Race at Bristol.
Yeah, that bothers me too. It's the 500. Like, come on. Anyway, rant over. We're going bowling at Watkins Glen. It's only 8 laps longer than the Xfinity race, so that's kind of funny to me.
It's why I have an issue with it. I've always said this race is too short. It's way too short. But like I said, I'll carry on about that later.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to carry on about it now, I'm perfectly fine with it. I was just saying, I was trying to set it up that we had a very tame race for a little bit, and then it like all hell broke loose at the end of the stages. And I mean, you go ahead, tell us why, Kevin.
I mean, my biggest thing is it's a little bit. I guess it's because the race ends up being so short. I guess they want it to be a sprint race, and I don't think they really factored in like the Xfinity race. I think this race should be well over 100 laps. I think it should be 120 laps, just because they're going so fast here. They're pulling 1 minute tens here, and if you factor that into the if they don't go green, or if they go green the entire race, it's a 2 hour race, and that's way too short in my opinion. That's a sprint race amongst sprint races. So I mean, honestly, I think it should be well over 100 laps. If they did ever decide to use the boot, I'd say keep the boot and keep the race length the same, just because it'll allow for more attrition. It allows for more strategy, because the way this race ended up being, for the most part, the only real strategy was, well, do you pit before the stage or after? That was about it. And it ended up not really having anything crazy happen. We had Chase Elliott leading 80 of 90 laps. We had the same guy running second for majority of the race. And the only real time we had different leaders were because of the stages. And that's really it. And it was really a shame to see, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with you on the length of the race. When it all boiled down to it, it was only a 2 hour and 14-minute race, which is one of the shortest, if not the shortest, of the entire Cup schedule. So I definitely would have enjoyed having at least another 30 minutes to an hour of racing, especially at Watkins Glen. It would have definitely opened up the strategy a little bit more. People definitely would have been trying, if one person was going to be on a 3-stop strategy, other people were going to try and do it in 4 because of the stages and whatnot. So I definitely would have been intrigued to see it go like that. But we still had a pretty compelling race, despite it being so short, despite the shortcomings of the aero package and engine horsepower and all that. It was definitely a interesting race because of all the little flavors that came from all the incidents with Kyle Busch and Bubba Wallace and Kyle Busch and William Byron and Jimmy Johnson and Ryan Blaney. Like, all that stuff factored into what we had for this event at Watkins Glen, this Cup race at Watkins Glen. And even at the end of it, I got into it with somebody over on Twitter where we talked. He said something about, oh, well, maybe if Truex had a faster car, he would have just went up and gone because Kyle Busch was able to cut through the field so much. And I laid it out. I'm like, listen, there's clean air and there's dirty air. And when you have clean air, you have the biggest advantage of anybody else. And that's what Chase Elliott had. The entire race, he had clean air, except for maybe like 5 laps when he was trying to chase down.
5 laps after stage 1 ended, where there were people staying out for fuel reasons. That's
Right.
it.
And that was Kyle Larson leading those laps. And Kyle Larson was on way older tires. So, I mean, I would say that Elliott and Truex definitely had more equal cars, but coming down to it at the end, it was abundantly clear that Truex had the faster car and just could not do anything. We'll get into that in a second. But I was still on the edge of my seat. I was still wondering, is Chase going to catch a lap car wrong? Is he going to, do what he did last year and not brake correctly going into one and kind of slip up and give Truex the opportunity? You didn't have fuel coming into play this year as you did last year. But you did have contact between the two at the last restart, where Truex kind of threw it in there, and they made contact, and Elliott's team was worried that the tire was going to go soft and they might have to pit. Thankfully for them, they didn't have to, and they were able to continue on. But, I mean, Truex was just there. He was stalking him the entire rest of the race, and he just couldn't do anything with it. It had to have been so frustrating for him, just sitting there trying to get every advantage he could, and then every time he get some little bit, he'd hit that, as he said, wall of dirty air, and just couldn't do anything with it. And I mean, Still, compelling race. Definitely on the edge of my seat. I was wondering if who was gonna get it, what was gonna happen. But Chase Elliott ends up taking his second victory of the year, and there was definitely some sour feelings post race between a lot of our big names in the sport.
Well, yeah, you had obviously Truex was frustrated, but I'll get to that in a second. But I mean, you had Kyle Busch basically playing bumper cars with everybody. He gets underneath William Byron. It was lap 3 or 4. Um, Pretty much takes himself out. I really didn't see anything that Byron did different than anyone else would have done. You always want to crowd the guy underneath you if you're at a road course because there's only one groove, so you got to keep it as low as possible. He spins, still manages to make his way through the field. He was just that fast, and I think if he wasn't as damaged as he was throughout the race, he would have had something for Bush or for Truex and Chase Elliott there at the end. So he gets into it with Byron. Or he gets into it with Byron again, turns him, or pretty much just runs him through the grass in the inner loop, and then you have the clip of Pat Canales pretty much saying, if you don't do anything about Kyle Busch, you're not going to be in a ride anymore, or something to that effect. So you got Canales in Byron's ear, and Byron's 20, 21 years old, so he doesn't want to disappoint or upset his crew chief, a 7-time Cup Series crew chief, in his ear. So he goes and tries to knock out Bush, or at least give him some unfinished business and give him a little bump to the back. And then Kyle Busch brake checks him and destroys the front end of Byron's car. I don't think it hurt Byron too bad. I mean, he finished 21st, which I think is where he would have finished anyway. He started second, but he did not have the speed to stay up there. Maybe would have had a top 10 at best. But then you have Kyle Busch getting into Bubba Wallace, spins Bubba Wallace in the carousel, and then you got them battling it out, duking it out down the front stretch. They're knocking each other apart down the entire front stretch, and these cars do not take damage as well as a composite body does in Xfinity. So it's not like, oh, you can bump and bang and they pretty much stay the same. If you get any damage on these cars, you're done. Like, the aero is way too important. You're done. It's over. It knocks off a pretty significant amount of time. So they're bumping and banging. Bubba doesn't care. He just wants to get his revenge, and he just turns Kyle Busch to a bunch of cheers. I mean, most people hate the guy, so obviously a huge pro Chase Elliott crowd jumps up in elation that Bubba Wallace wrecks Kyle Busch. So the entire race for Kyle is just an absolute mess. And then obviously you got the issues with Truex and in this dirty air. And like I said, we'll get that to the more expanded version of that in a second. But I mean, he just could not pass. 100% could not pass. And then at the end of the race, we had Brian Blaney and Jimmy Johnson getting into it. And John Haverland, is that how you say his last name?
Yep, John Haverland.
Okay. Had the exclusive of the back and forth, and it's hard to hear, but I mean, there's words being exchanged, and pretty much Jimmy Johnson after the fact said that Ryan Blaney's a coward and a pussy and doesn't stand up for himself. But you look at the interview or the exchange, Ryan Blaney doesn't look like he's that phased. He's the kind of guy, he's pretty calm, cool, and collected. Doesn't seem like anything was going on. But so you have them pissed off at each other, and then you just once again we'll finalize it with Martin Truex, the Truex situation, and I don't know how, if you look at this objectively, Truex caught Chase Elliott a few times. The margin varies, but we're talking about a couple seconds of catching him and just not being able to do anything with him. And of course Chase Elliott had a fast car. Of course he was on the pole, and he definitely had a top. If he wasn't the best car, he was the second best car. But anytime Truex got to him, he would sail it into the corner. He would sail it into the bus stop, and he would get there. He would get really close. He would drive it into the carousel. He would get to about a car length, and then he would just get pulled away. Going to the same thing into turn 10. Pace pulls away. So, if you're in the driver's seat, that's the best information you can get from a race is what are the drivers saying. And Truex, pretty much what we all know is hitting a wall of dirty air. If it can happen at a place like Richmond, it's 100% happening here because they're going about 80 90 miles an hour in these corners. They're going about 100 miles an hour in the carousel. And there's one groove in the carousel. If they're going to have to add traction compound to the carousel and to turn 10 and to turn 1 and into the S, I'm going to shoot myself because the racing at Watkins Glen is so good. And of course, in the back of the pack, it's going to be good. But I mean, there are plenty of instances in this race where there's 5, 6, 7 cars lined up the same margin for the entire run. There was a point where I think it was like Jimmy Johnson, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, Eric Almirola, all these guys. Matt DiBenedetto was in there, I think. And they were all split the exact same margin between all of them up the S's. It just frustrated me to see that because I know exactly what causes it. And the thing is, of course, there's going to be dirty air because there's an 8-inch spoiler. I remember when they had this size spoiler when Jeff Gordon got aero push and sailed it into the guardrail out of the S's. So it 100% exists. And the fact that people are in denial about it still, like after all this year, and of course the mile and a half's have been better, but I mean, we're going to Michigan next week, and I thought the whole point of this was that they can pass down the straightaway. Well, they can't pass down the straightaway, and they're not going to be able to do it here at Watkins Glen because the straightaways aren't long enough. They're not going fast enough. So it's completely hurting the racing. I would have loved to see Truex get around him because if he had gotten around him and then just pulled a 5-second lead or something, it would have 100% verified what we already knew was that Truex had a better car, 100% had a better car. And we're not talking about like destroying Chase, but we're talking about 2-3 tenths a lap. And that would over time culminate to them being really close. And he just couldn't get around him. 100% could not get around him the entire race because Chase had just enough clean air and just enough of a car to maintain it. So it was just really frustrating to watch because I know if we had the package from last year, if you look at last year, there's a lot of slipping and sliding. That wasn't really the case this year. And I really think that they need to reevaluate the short tracks and the road courses for next year to go back to the 2018 package because it really hurts this race. It really hurts the racing at the short tracks, and it really does not need to happen at these tracks that don't necessarily need to be slowed down for safety or for racing's sake. It's just ridiculous.
I don't think I'm gonna be frustrated at the package anymore just because it's becoming tiresome. What I cannot stand is people who deny. And they live in their happy little world where, oh, we had a really good race, so the package must be working. No, that's not how this works. We had a compelling race. We had a fun, awesome, very, story-driven event at Watkins Glen in the Cup Series on Sunday afternoon. But that doesn't mean that there aren't criticisms that need to be addressed. And for people, for there to be media members who just up and will completely flat out deny that there ever existed any type of aero push ever is absolutely absurd to me, because the drivers say it every single... Oh, my microphone just dropped. But they say it every single race. It's absurd. It really is absurd. It almost reminds me of... And I don't want to get political here on this show. That's the last thing I want to do. But it reminds me of the actual media where something is said and it's clear as day of what is said, and yet something else is reported. It's like everybody's trying to push their own agenda here, and I hate it. I hate it because Martin Truex Jr. gets out of the car and he says, I hit the wall of air. I hit the wall of dirty air, and I couldn't do anything about it. And you could see in his lap times, you could see after that last pit stop how there was quite a gap there between the two of them, and Truex closed in almost immediately and just sat there for about 27, 26 laps till the end of the race. And every time they would catch up to a lap car, he would close in that little bit more because now they'd both be in the dirty air. Even for that split second that Chase was in the dirty air, they equaled out a little bit more, and Truex was able to get that advantage a little bit more. But once Chase cleared the lap car, and now it was just Truex in the dirty air, that gap just it continued onward, and it just it doesn't make sense to me that anybody would deny that that's a thing, because it's happening right in front of your faces. That if we had, like you said, if we had last year's package, Truex would have been side by side. They would have been slipping. They might have tangled a little bit. It would have been a more compelling race for the lead. And yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that if Martin Truex Jr. would have pitted first, and Chase Elliott would have pitted a lap later, and Truex would have been the first one out of the pits because of the pit sequence, that Truex would have gapped Elliott, and it would have been a boring finish. It would have been a boring-ass finish because Truex would have had like a 10-second lead by the end of that race, and Elliott probably would have been battling for third back with Denny Hamlin for a little bit. So maybe that would have been a little bit exciting, but I mean, it was just... It blows my mind. It continues to blow my mind, and that's what I have the biggest problem with, is that not only media members but also NASCAR executives are like they continue to just completely
deny, deflect, deny. It's fine, deny.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you want to, like, it's just, I get that you want to build excitement and that it's your job to make it seem, that everything is fine. But, I mean, you have to face the facts and you have to face reality at some point where it's, you're looking at that what we have right now is creating the worst dirty air effects in the history of the sport. And the drivers are talking about it every freaking week. To a point where at Pocono earlier this season, Kyle Busch didn't even want to talk about it anymore because it becomes so tiresome. And thankfully, we're still talking about it. Kyle Busch maybe has backed off a little bit because he got tired of it, but we're still talking about it because the drivers are still talking about it. And it continues to blow my mind. I just wish that what I hope for anything to happen is that maybe NASCAR executives can sit down with the drivers and try and maybe figure it out together, because we're just going to continue to build this divide at this current pace, where you've got certain media members and NASCAR executives on one, and fans on one side saying everything is perfectly fine. We're getting the greatest racing ever in the history of the sport. And I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that isn't what it possibly could be. I don't agree with it, but I'm not saying that I'm not enjoying the racing, because I really am. But at the same time, I'm sitting on the other side where, and me and Kevin are both sitting on the side of that we see what's happening, where these aero effects are definitely not the future of the sport. Because if we continue to build on this and we continue to build our future based on what we have today, we're going to kill NASCAR, because nobody's going to want to watch another Formula One. That's what this is going to become. Another Formula One, another IndyCar at certain tracks, like we talked about it a couple weeks ago, at how IndyCar at, what was it, Iowa? They had such terrible dirty air effects where they just spread out and they were just parading around at the same space to one car in front of the other car. And that's what we're heading towards if we don't fix this now.
I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a rocket scientist or an aeronautical engineer.
Me neither.
Or a math expert in any stretch. I've taken calculus 3 times and I failed it twice. So it's not like I'm a genius here. But if you have a car, let's say a 1990 Chevy Lumina, and it produces 200 pounds of downforce, and behind another car, it produces 150 pounds of downforce. Obviously, there's a discrepancy there. But it's only 50 pounds of downforce, so it's not that much different. We're talking about 50 pounds of downforce that maybe takes away a couple hundredths of a second, maybe a tenth of a second behind another car. That's pretty much what they were running back in the 90s. If you go watch a race at Darlington, if you go watch any of the old races at Atlanta, Charlotte, if you go watch Michigan, we're about to go to Michigan, and we're probably going to see more of the same that we did earlier this year. They're on top of each other the entire run. And it's not like they're running wide open. They're slowing down to about 150 miles an hour at Michigan back in the day, doing about 195 miles an hour going into turn one. So it's not like they were wide open. They were on top of each other to start the run. And of course, as the run goes along, tires become a factor and the equipment becomes a factor. It starts to spread out. But it wasn't because of dirty air. Fast forward to 2013. Let's fast forward to now. Say you have a car that produces 3,000 pounds of downforce. Say if you're behind a car, and these are not official numbers, I'm talking about speculative and hypothetical. Say you have a car behind another car that produces 2,100 pounds of downforce. Now, when you look at it from a percentage standpoint, it's not that much different. You're looking at maybe a difference between 75% downforce behind another car versus about 70%. But we're talking about 900 pounds of downforce lost. Of course, it's going to be a huge issue. Like you just mentioned with Iowa, you would lose 3/4 of a second behind another car. When we went to Dover earlier this year, they were talking about, and Bob Levine was really vocal about it, and a lot of the guys in the cars were talking about it. As soon as you got within a half a second of the car, instead of running 24 sixes, you're running 25 twos. So we're talking about half a second. And I mentioned Richmond earlier. 100% dirty air ruined the finish of that race because they were all on top of each other because they couldn't pass each other. So yeah, I hate to say it, but yeah, dirty air has been an issue since gravity has existed. Of course, it's been a thing in racing, but the issue is that there's so much downforce discrepancy from behind another car compared to being by yourself. It's so drastic. They need to focus on getting the downforce coefficient and the number down as low as they can get for the Gen 7. They need to get rid of side force altogether. I don't know whose bright idea it was to design these cars to turn left, because if you design a car to do that, then if you're behind another one, guess what? It won't be able to do that as well. So they need to make the cars symmetrical. C, they need to make sure the car behind does not get all the dirty air. These cars are sealed to the ground so much. The quarter panels are sealed to the ground so low. The side skirts are razor thin on the track within 1/4 of an inch, if not lower, everywhere. The entire track, it's down that. So of course, if you get behind that, it's going to be a void of air. And that's what the issue of these guys, an 8-inch spoiler. An 8-inch spoiler. That is a massive spoiler. And it would have been fine on a car that produces 200 pounds of downforce. Because go back and look at the racing from back in the 90s. Those cars had huge spoilers on it. 4, 5, 6-inch spoilers. But the issue is that now you have a huge downforce number that you have to race with. And if you get behind somebody, you lose a significant part of that. And that's the issue. It's not that it's new, it's that it's worse. And that it's more of a factor than it ever has been in the history of the sport. And the people that are like, oh, well, the racing was still good. How could you even think about talking about this one thing that is always a common issue? It's because it's like going to a restaurant and, you get there and you like they give you a nice meal and you think, well, something was missing. Like, I feel like it could have been better. It's like, well, why are you complaining? It was a good meal. It's like, well, I know it could have been better, so why would I have paid for this? Why would I have not? I could have just done it at home. I could have just had something better at the house. Well, in this case, We don't have something else to go to. What are we going to do? All go watch IndyCar? They run, it's a completely different sport. It's a completely different fringe of entertainment. I can't go and turn on ASA. I can't go on and turn on the ARCA series because they're as high end as NASCAR. This is all we have. This is 100% all we have if you want stock car racing in the United States. And the fact that they're going in a direction where instead of it's just wishful ignorance. Though the racing is good, how could you say it's bad? Well, yeah, the racing has been pretty decent this year. I'll give it that. But I've seen several times a bunch of times this year where the racing was hindered because of dirty air. And if the Gen 7 does not address it, it's going to be more of the same. And guess what, Dave Moody? You're going to have to defend that too when they decide to make the dirty air just as bad as they did with the Gen 6. The Gen 6 sucks, and they figured that out at Phoenix in 2013. Danny Hamlin said it as soon as he could that the racing and the dirty air is really bad 6 years ago, and it's not changed. What makes you think it's going to be any different? The car sucks, and it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
I'm done.
That was yeah. I pretty much agree with everything there. It's I had a point that I wanted to say there, but I just it with the dirty air, nobody's denying that it's never going to go away. Like we know that it's going to always exist. It's that just the way it's. I mean, they talk about how it existed back in like or the air effects existed back in like the 50s and the 60s. It just didn't become like mainstream until the late 80s, 90s. So, they've always been talking about it, and it's always been on some of these racers' minds, and it's always going to be on everybody's minds going forward. Nobody's going to deny the fact that it's going to exist. Like, it's always going to be there. But we live in a time where we can have the technology to make it less. We can make the effects less. I mean, I brought it up before. The Xfinity race versus the Cup race. The Xfinity race has the much shorter spoiler and the much less downforce on and everything else that factored into less dirty air, which allowed for Austin Cindric to get up to AJ Allmendinger and give him the bumper and them to actually race each other. That isn't possible. That isn't, a factor in the Cup Series when it comes to the clean air. Clean air is absolutely, it's not even king, it's God Emperor in this sense. You cannot even come close. If you have clean air and you have I'd say a top 10 running car, you're gonna have the advantage no matter what. It's just something needs to change. Something the whole mentality of it needs to change. People need to see I can't even talk about it anymore. It's just so frustrating to every week it becomes an issue, and every week that it's like we have a really good race, all the people that say, oh, it's a really good race, they just want to bury it. They just want to be like, oh, well, we can't talk about it anymore. No, this is the perfect time to talk about it. This is a perfect time to point it out how it could have been a better race.
Right, and that's the whole point.
Exactly.
It could have been better, and there's a lot of races this year that could have been better. Richmond could have been better. Dover could have been better. All these mile-and-a-half races could have been so much better. Imagine a race where all these guys can suck up on top of each other and draft and be able to pass in the corner. Could you imagine how crazy that would be? Man, it would be just crazy if they had 50 lead changes a race instead of 10.
Or 1. Or none. Or
Right.
whatever. But anyway, Watkins Glen was still a really good race, and I'm really looking forward to finally adding a first Camaro to my tiny car shelf in Chase Elliott's race win Napa Camaro. So that'll be fun. We've got Michigan coming up this week. We're gonna have the first taste of it tomorrow night. which will be the Peak Antifreeze Series, and that race should be very close to the Auto Club, like you said last week. It should be very close to how Auto Club played out for them. And then we've got the Truck Series and the Cup Series at Michigan, and the Xfinity Series at Mid Ohio, and it's going to be another fun racing weekend in my opinion. And you mentioned it. We talked about it before. They're adding the traction compound to Michigan for the first time, and I feel like that'll probably help with the racing, and that'll probably help with the aero effects, because why would they put the traction compound down if aero effects didn't exist or whatever, and blah blah blah. Anyway, yeah, Michigan, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I can kind of defend the compound being there regardless, just because ever since the repave, the track has not worn in at all. It just hasn't worn in at all. So you got they said that they're going to do the top 40 feet of the track. I finally figured it out while the show was going on. I was trying to find out how wide this track was in the corners. It's 73 feet wide, which is a weird number. But I know it's a lot wider in the corner than it is down the straightaway, so I had to look that up. So the first 30 feet or so is going to be as is, which that's pretty much the groove width that they've had the last few years here. And then you've got the last 40 feet being compound. So I think it's going to improve the truck race. The issue that they had in the Cup race was that, and I read the article that presented this whole news about the compound. If you try to pass low and there's a giant line of cars behind you, you're going, instead of going up one spot, you're losing 3, 4, 5 spots, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be like how it is at a plate race. It should be a speedway, and that's what this is. It's a speedway. So I'm hoping that they can run the high line. It's going to be pretty much wide open still. The issue is that you can't suck up to the guy in front of you. It's going to be basically leader has a 0.2 of a second lead, and that's about it. So that kind of goes back to the Gen 6 just being a flawed car. It has so much of turbulence behind the car that you can't even catch up to the front of it. That's why they had to put a 9-inch spoiler with a wicker bill on it to make the racing at the super speedways even remotely decent in comparison to what we've had for the last 15 years. So it should be an interesting race. I'm excited for tomorrow because I was talking to Blake Reynolds about it, and he said it's pretty much going to be wide open until about halfway through, and that's probably going to make the racing even better just because there are so many grooves that they can use here as the track wears in. So you're going to be going 3 and 4 wide, and you can run the high line if you really need to. You can run the bottom if you really need to, and make it work. So I'm excited to see how the racing is tomorrow night at 9, and I'm excited yet still kind of concerned that the racing expectations I have for Sunday and for the truck race on Saturday. So we'll see.
I'm definitely looking forward to it either way. It should be definitely for the truck race at least. Like I said before, it should be a wild finish to the regular season, regardless. And the Cup race at Michigan, I mean, they're coming back for the second time, so, and the first time they had the whole rain out and all that stuff, so hopefully weather isn't a factor this time. But I'll be watching tomorrow night, as I always do, in the Peak Antifreeze series, and I'll be covering that for TRE as I always do. And for the rest of the week for me, I'm catching up on work, and then on Saturday night I'm gonna hit my 4th racetrack of the month, or in a row, 4th racetrack in a row. I'm going to my local track at Riverhead before next weekend. The weekend after that, I'm going to go to Bristol. So 5 racetracks in 5 weeks for me. I am definitely already exhausted after 3. What do you got going on for the rest of the week, Kev?
I got work.
All right.
We're running a little bit short. Got a couple people either transferring or getting promoted. It seems like every single week at my job. So today and tomorrow my days off, and then I got 10 days in a row, or 13 days in a row, minus 1 day off. So I got a split. I got a day in the middle of that long 13-day split. So I will definitely find a way to watch both races. I'll definitely find a way to watch the race at Mid Ohio, just because I know it's going to be an absolute demo derby at some points. So I'll definitely keep in touch on the racing side while I'm working, and I'm sure you will too when you finally go back to work on Sunday.
Right.
If you even go to work on Sunday.
It's gonna be different. I'm gonna have to remember to charge my iPad so I can bring that with me and put that on during my break. So yeah, it'll be fun though. I'm looking forward to it. So that's all the time that we have for tonight. As always, you can follow us on Apple Podcast, Google Play Music, and on Spotify. I keep promising it. Probably after episode 15, we're going to have a format change. We'll try to get some guests in here. If you're interested in being a guest, I don't care who you are at this point. We'll try to see if we can work something out. I think that would be kind of swell to get that going. Me and Kevin have talked about it for a little bit. But we'll definitely
might have to get the bottom split head announcer and Sean Butler to turn this show upside down, because we definitely need something interesting, and he's got some energy, and he's got some he can turn it up and
oh, come on, Kev. Show. We've been interesting. Just we haven't been, people haven't found us yet to know our interestingness yet. Right. But I mean, I definitely I can't wait to turn it up a notch though at some point. So give it until maybe after the week after Bristol. What's that? Not Darlington. Is it Darlington? It might be Darlington. Yeah. Give it until after Darlington, when I can finally get back on my normal work schedule, and we'll have hopefully a new format, a new compelling format for you all. But anyway, like I said, all the time we have for tonight. I'm Justin Melillo. That's Kevin McAdams. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your week.
Goodbye.